And this is going to be Nassim, who has been a colleague of Peter at NYU, Tandon, among other things, and a friend, and a discussant of his achievements. Thank you, Nassim.
Thank you. It works. Thank you. Great. Thanks. Thanks for staying. I know it's tough to be the last speaker because you know what you have probably plane to catch. So I'll be, and also after 2 days of technical equations, I'm sure, I mean, after one lecture, I get tired. So I'm sure you want that. So I'm gonna have only a few equations, mostly pictures. So these are my conversations with peers between 95 and 2021, some by email, some in person, some by intermediary via someone. I once I stole one of his employees. So I was having a conversation with him via that employee. It was a, sorry? Is it working? Testing. Yeah, I have, it's working, yeah. Okay, thanks. So, conversation with Peter. So that was the last, this is Peter. That was my last meal with Peter in somewhere around October 2021. And as you see, this is a tiramisu that he finished. And as you can see, he didn't leave no prisoners. There was only one fork. He didn't offer me part of it. So he ate it alone entirely. And I know that he didn't drink wine. So that was, you know, my last meal with Peter. And that's the last conversation I had with Peter around that period. And I can't make head or tail what it was, because I see my handwriting on the left and his handwriting on the right. And I'll try to figure out what it is, and maybe some other time I'll try to figure out what he's trying to drive with this. I can recognize Shannon Entropy to the left, but I don't know about it's probably related to Professor Cherubini's thing, right? Somehow, maybe, or maybe if you can decipher, I'll send you the thing. Right. So my connection with Peter is October 15, 2015. I sent him an email because there was some palace intrigue in here in the university, and was former players, the dean, the former dean, and the former chair of the department, and there was some palace intrigue, and needless to say that Peter was invited to take over the department. So I was the intermediary in the transaction, and I told the fellow, we were looking for someone. I said, there are two people I can point to. One person would be perfect for the job, but the job would not be perfect for him or her. The second person would be perfect for the job, and the job would be perfect for him. So he said, okay, let's start with the second person, and the second person was Peter. So some anecdote with Peter. This is a Bloomberg office, let me point out, where before it was built, as it was being built, he joined in 2003, I think. I had a, here, I had, well, that was I had an office here, and he figured out that I had an office nearby. And he volunteered to pay me a visit. So he showed up and paid a visit. They were then in building the headquarters, and they're renting temporary quarters. And he was building then the quant department before he hired Bruno Dupierre. So he came in, paid me a visit, say, what do you do for a living? On that later, his comment, and he noticed that I had a conference room. Okay, very nice. So that was maybe at 3 p.m. He spent some time in the office, and then he went away. Next morning, 8:45, he shows up with 4 people. Said, can we use the conference room? I said, okay, welcome. He used our conference room. So they were using our conference room. The following day, same thing. He would show up and do his meetings there. Say, am I invited to the meeting? No. So my conference room. So he took over the conference room to the point where when at some point we had to interview someone, and we had to have the person wait outside while Peter was doing his business in our conference room. So that lasted until they had their own headquarters, quite a bit. So that was my experience with Peter at the time. So the best way I mean, a lot of us have met Peter 1. There's 3 Peters, Peter 1, Peter 2, and Peter 3. Okay, Peter 1 is the Peter who was at Cornell, getting into derivatives, coming from an accounting background. And people, the minute they know that you have an accounting background, that's why you have to hide it. To me, the best training you can have in finance is accounting, because at least you know how the numbers matter. So he started an accounting background. Peter 2 is when he went, to Wall Street to start doing quant work on derivatives. And he had started doing derivatives, of course, but his accounting background, that's how he was known as. And then Peter 3 is the Peter who was here, and he dominated basically derivatives. He's the person who knew the most about whatever mathematics were attached to the product that I know. Okay, so, and one thing I noticed about him is over time, I've never seen him have a casual conversation about anything that did not make him go up the ladder. So I remember a trip to Brazil. He was in Brazil. I mean, when you're in Brazil, you talk derivatives. Maybe a little bit, He was talking derivatives all day long. Okay. And for 3 days of derivatives, say, Peter, there are other things in Brazil and conferences on derivatives. Okay. But he was only interested in derivatives. That was Peter. So that was my experience with him. And then sure enough, he was going up. And people, they graduate from school, they have stellar math background, and they stop here. Okay. And then they start going back down. Okay, they go work for, I don't know, some manufacturing firm in the research department and start going back down. Peter kept going up. Even people go into academia, they get stuck something on some idea they obsess about, and they stop. And they start coming back down, all right? And then you have amnesia that sets in later on. With Peter, it was boom, up, 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 up. And that is so impressive. It's very encouraging. And I saw it. So I said, okay, if Peter can do math, so you got to do the same. So it starts like working out. So I start doing math every morning for 2 or 3 hours for a while, and noticed, it was, that was what he was doing. And he would wake up sometimes at 4 a.m. because from his emails, I knew he was not up till 4 a.m. It was like he woke up at 4 a.m. So anyway, so this is the character it's rare to find, because here you see his dynamic, whereas other people are static. Okay, most people tend to find their static level and settle there very early in life. And he did not. He died, we're about the same age. He died in his 60s. He was still climbing, and probably faster than before. I don't know if you've noticed, but he started going faster, like stepping up faster and faster. This is why it's a tragedy. So the other thing is, he came to the department in 15, and I was on my way out. I basically wanted to do other things. Then finance, things related to risk, branch out into other ideas, start collaborating with Professor Cirillo, who joined the department as a part-timer or as an occasional visitor on things like wars, dynamics, power law theory, even work on pandemics. I want to branch out. And so the first thing he made me do is buy a Tesla. That he had neomania. He would buy anything new. And he was obsessive about technology. So he got me. So the first thing he did, so he joined. So I had my first conversation with him, and the next day I showed up, with the Tesla, whatever. I say, what do you guys have in stock? Okay, I take this, and it was a white Tesla that I got, right? And he taught me how to handle there's a lot of tricks with Tesla. You don't fill it up because your battery lasts longer. If you don't fill it up completely, he knew all the tricks. So he tutored me with a Tesla, right? So that's one thing. One other thing is that, Peter's birth name was Caruana, which is Maltese. And it was not a prestige name in Canada early on, but later on, Malta joined the EU, it becomes a different status. And of course, he started commenting on his Maltese origin, which he did not do before. Maybe 2-3 years after Malta joined the EU. So I challenged him, because Maltese is very similar to Lebanese, but with an asymmetry. It's exactly like Kullback-Leibniz. It's not symmetric. I can understand Maltese, but a Maltese cannot understand me. So it is like I understand 95%, particularly that the other words are Italian, but the reverse is not true. They understand maybe 25%. So that was, and then of course, you get a discussion about symmetry in entropy, all right? transforming how much energy you need to transform a Frenchman into an Italian versus it's not symmetric if you want to do DNA adjustments. Anyway, so that kind of thing. All right. So, and then before I start on the ideas, the big ideas, let's start with the small ideas. I discovered during the election that the updating were, that there was a binary option problem there. People didn't realize that Nate Silver was updating too fast. He gave Trump 80% and then it went back down to 50% or the reverse, Hillary 50%. And so it was too volatile. The updating forecast, they didn't get the point that a forecast must be subjected to to some restrictions that makes it less mean reverting. So I said, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty in the system. When there's a lot of uncertainty in the system, okay, a binary option goes to 50-50. All right, that's the first point that we made. So therefore, you should update less because you're going to change it later, and actually becomes a tradable strategy if someone trades. And the second point is that the Finetti argument, and that's a definite for anyone who invokes any kind of subjective probability or anything, is that a probability is a choice price you make at which you either buy or you sell. So we worked, he and I, we worked separately, completely separately. This is my paper, but that was completely separately on how to price elections. And you get the point that when vol goes to infinity, all right, or the maximum entropy of when you have P and 1 minus P, the maximum entropy is P equals P and Q equal half, like in the previous talk, all right? So you should not have, and this, people couldn't get it, that a forecast might be subjected to martingale, so just like tradable, like an arbitrage subjected to arbitrage boundaries. So what Peter did is, I was working and I discovered that I was looking for a process, okay, to price an option, you need a stochastic process, okay, to price. The stochastic process that we knew of were on a real line, right? So he was working on bounded Brownian motion, and I was working on something between 0 and 1. And we violate, there's I think Gelfand once said that physicists know enough math, they're like burglars. Burglars study the penal code so they can break it. So here, Peter broke the rule. Well, basically, what he developed a Brownian motion, a bounded Brownian motion, using Ornstein-Uhlenbeck with a mean reversion coefficient that is negative. So that way it stays a martingale in 0, 1, or in bounded in between A and B. Okay, so to price an option, okay, all we do is say the probability is like a martingale, the probability of winning, the objective probability of winning, or the pole, or anything you're using, or proportion that you observe. You translate it into another process, that's the shadow process, on a real line, and then use your Bachelier option pricing. That was my idea. So Peter was writing on bounded Brownian motion. And surprisingly, I came up with this stochastic process, okay, which would be a martingale, okay, at all points for all values. The other ones, if you start with a regular stochastic process or anything else, it's no longer a martingale when you go away from 0, from the center, from the initial point 0.5, I mean, not 0. So, but then Peter had figured out before me that an Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process can give you a martingale on a bounded Brownian motion. And this is exactly, it turns out to be in Ornstein-Uhlenbeck with coefficient sigma is a coefficient, okay? Negative sigma squared is a coefficient, and mu is 0. So it's quite interesting. And we violated all the laws, okay? And it works, all right? So basically, don't take no for an answer. Someone tells you can't have. And every textbook, when I tried on Mathematica to generate Ornstein-Uhlenbeck, it would blow up because the coefficient was negative. But you generate something like that and it works. Anyway, so this is my first thing. So now let me go backward and my conversation with him on my real work, which is basically reconciling theory, saying we live in the real world, all right? And he understood perfectly. So when he visited me, I was then buying, or I don't know if you've seen the statement by Universal today, I buy tail options. Every single finance professor in the United States, France, Colombia, Southern Argentina, and then the Italian Republic in the north, Italian Republic in the south, every single finance professor will tell you that these are overpriced. So Peter, when he visited me, said, I told him, no, they're underpriced. Why? It's the wrong equation. He said, but all these papers, I explained to him, no, these papers, they specify a probability distribution. And I tell you, we're going to see later that they're overpriced based on that distribution. But, in the different representations, they're not overpriced. He said, you're right, this is a great business you have. Immediately, not a single, I had not met any academic until then who understood, who accepted the point. And of course, there's Eliot and other people who supported me in the idea, but Peter was the first person I talked to about it. He immediately said, yeah, of course, yeah, makes sense. Larry Summers said it's a lunacy. Everybody thinks it's a lunacy, and they all go bankrupt, as like LTCM. They were selling overpriced out of money options, directly or indirectly. So I had written Dynamic Hedging, and then a tragic thing happened in 2022. As we know, we got this email, actually, we got this information. Mike Lipkin would, I think, call the hospital to try to get background information from, claiming that we're relatives or something. We had a month of really stressful months waiting to see what would happen to Peter. And was a tragic background. And Barry called me up, said, you know what? You're back. Peter is teaching a class called Static and Dynamic Hedging. So you're going to come teach it. I told him, listen, Barry, this was written in 1996, published in 1996, finished in 1995. And how, he said, well, Peter is gone. For Peter, you're going to go teach his class, Static and Dynamic Hedging. I think there's a student here who was there, right? So that's a story about what is, and what is dynamic hedging about. And he was very, very interested in the idea of dynamic hedging and pick up immediately. I tell him this is a problem with dynamic hedging. He wouldn't resist, he would immediately, I have enough correspondence. I don't know if it's ethical to show all correspondence. I can show at least my side or some of the technical things that are on paper that he replied. Anyway, and my point that he got right away is that this is surgery and this is biology to the left and this is surgery to the right. So you don't say that surgery is practical biology. Okay, you don't say that this is, okay, and here I was trying to explain to a lot of people that there's something other than empirical or theoretical in finance. There's something called, what surgery is to medicine, or what surgery is, to biology. It's applied science, it's completely different because there are rules. You got to start with a structure, and thanks Eliot understood right away my point and said, okay, no, you got to come and do work. And I worked with Eliot and Dilip, and of course Peter would be the one who would argue with me on the following point, because there's another person whose national origin, like me, is a pit trader. I was a pit trader. I didn't come in as a quant. I was a trader. Okay, I'm cheating. I was partly only 3 years doing this. Mike Lipkin, how long did Lipkin did you stay? 23 years doing this. Yeah. Okay. So I did mostly this. Okay, most of my career is upstairs trader, but I spent 2 years in the pit. So I came from practice, from surgery, and then you want to go figure out the theory, and then you realize there's some flaws. So let me talk about some flaws, a lot of which I've worked with with Eliot. And let's do something very basic about something with Ito's lemma, but something very, very basic, okay? Let's say that I am short an option, okay? Period T0, S0, and then the thing moves. Period T3, at SU, okay, the upper bound, I have an order to buy, okay? It triggers by saying, okay, this is my delta is large enough, I need to buy, okay? The problem is you need a time bracket to buy to realize what your delta is, and another time bracket, just like there's an incompressible time bracket as Ito, to put your order, okay? So and then you pay the bid and ask spread. So like I remember one day, I saw a trader tell the desk said, oh, I'm short volatile. His delta was short 100 million. Sell 100 million at like 105. He told him, but the price is 103. He said, well, then sell 500 million. Okay, so in other words, there is this incompressible thing, and let me explain here. In Ito's lemma, you get S at T0 as T plus delta T, okay? So delta is S of T0, and you get the difference between these two prices. In the real world, you get the delta at S of T0, but the second term, the thing here is that difference between these two. You see? So there is an incompressible period here that you cannot compress, okay? Now, if you're short volatility, you get information because if you're short volatility, you're working in time space. You cannot work in time space. You got to work in price space. Now, what does time space and price space mean? Very simple. People view the world, you put a histogram, okay, one day, so that's time space, and then you have the distribution of the return over that day, with 1 day, 1 month, delta T, okay? So it's a delta T based strategy in the mind of people. No, in fact, it's a delta P based strategy. In other words, when the thing moves, our clock is simply like all these stochastic clocks, is how long it takes before the stopping time to exit the tunnel. So our representation in the way we trade is not an histogram of a delta T. It's a histogram of time between the delta T. How long it takes to move $1, $2, 1%, 2%, 1 mean deviation, 2 mean deviation. So what does it mean? It means it's impossible to dynamically hedge a short option position, even if the process is Gaussian. It's impossible, right? Under transaction cost. However, look, if I am a long gamma trader, long volatility, I can put an order and I can operate in price space without transaction cost. You see, I put an order to sell at SU. When it's filled, it's filled. It's called the limit order. And you don't pay transaction cost. So this person here pays transaction cost. That person doesn't pay transaction cost. Now what happens is, and then again, that was the thing here, is that if you're long gamma, you are necessarily price based, okay? And if you're short gamma, the price is optimal. Delta, it's not feasible to go by delta T, okay? Because you cannot compress delta T. And in fact, it's not, if this revision policy, okay, can only be done for very small amounts compared to your capital. Otherwise, you're going to hit the Nozomi barrier. So basically what happened is we say, how come we have an option market with market makers? Because they buy a lot of options and sell a lot of options and they hedge only the net. So per option, it represents a very small amount. When you're short gamma, per option. So this is why you can do probably small amounts, and it's not relevant because it's tiny as compared to, you're long $1 billion of options and short $1 billion, 20 million of options or something like that, or 30, something like that. You cannot do otherwise without blowing up. And we'll see other reasons why you cannot do it. So in other words, you got to look at it as inventory and you're hedging the net. You're not hedging every option separately. So that's already one restriction in the real world, that we have to operate in time space, and you cannot be short gamma. You cannot price an option as if you're going to hedge it dynamically. There goes dynamically hedging. Now you're going to tell me why dynamically hedging is the basis of option trading. And I would say, yes, it's probably the basis of option trading, but not the basis of using the mu someone mentioned earlier a paper I did with Derman, the first paper, that put-call parity forces you to use the same mean. But I used another argument later in the paper by saying, by Breeden-Litzenberger, if you do all this, instead of doing dynamically hedging, you go to the limit of delta t equals 0, which is not possible. Okay, here you go the limit of delta k equals 0, because and the only solution is for the second derivative, the Breeden-Litzenberger for the put equals the Breeden-Litzenberger for the call. Okay, otherwise you have put-call parity arbitrage all across. So you need to the same measure for the put or the call at the arbitrage forward rate, which is determined, for us in a risk-neutral way, and that we know known since Keynes. Keynes 1923 said the forward is nothing but an arbitrage relationship based on differential interest rates. Is not an expectation operator. If there's an expectation, it probably is built in interest rate, but that's not our business. And same thing, an option goes by the forward. An European option goes by the forward. So that is what they call the vertical argument, whereas the other argument is the dynamic hedging argument, is the temporal argument. It doesn't work. We go across strike, not across. This is how we use we remove the mu from the stock. Now, does the option, but in dynamic hedging, the option loses all its risk. Does the option cease to have risk? No, the option will always have risk in the real world, okay? The option will always have risk. That's the problem. So now next, I tried to branch out of finance and then collaborating with some people here on fat tails. Basically, the whole idea is pre-asymptotic things look differently, okay? And this is a cartoon, someone who said, we don't know nothing about tails, because basically saying that it's fat tail, once Gaussian, everything is easy. Or say it's fat tails, we don't know, all right? There are a lot of other things that appear. This is the tableau of fat tails, fat tailedness using the conventional representation, okay? So that you start here, you have sub-exponential, which is basically the log normal is the sub-exponential class. You start with the degenerate and Bernoulli, then syntail from, one syntail, in other words, convergence to Gaussian from a binomial has compact support. Okay, you're coming from below, or you have a true Gaussian from lattice, so that doesn't have compact support, which is what we use. Okay, and then you have sub-exponential, then you have supercubic, which is the one that they assumed worked in finance. It's a t-distribution, say, for example, with tail index of 3, finite variance, nearly finite skewness, another finite variance here, Levy stable for infinite variance, and then, of course, you have forget about it when there's no mean anymore, no expectation. Okay, so this is pretty much the traditional one. So I looked at it and said, no, that's not how it works. Pre-asymptotically, I'm going to discover that the log normal, you take a log normal, when sigma is low, it behaves perfectly like a Gaussian. When sigma is high, it scares me. It's like a Cauchy, okay? So the way we're going to decide what is fat-tailed or not is speed according to the law of large numbers. Okay, so basically, we're going to say how fast we're going to get there. So the idea of infinite variance means it would take infinity to get there. And of course, so start ranking things basically based on, this is the law of large numbers. Very quickly, this is a Pareto distribution, they call the 80-20, let's look how it's bumpy, so it takes a while. So if I take a Gaussian and say, okay, I need how long, how much my mean deviation, because we're not using variance as an indicator of dispersion, but mean deviation, because it's going to exist up to an alpha of 1. So I need 30 observations for a Gaussian. I'd quiz statistician and tell them, okay, I need 30 for the Gaussian. How much more do you need for a, say a distribution with finite variance, but with finite mean, but say an exponent of something like, say, like Pareto 80-20, all right? 1.14, okay? How much more data? They say, well, maybe 2 or 3 times more. You need 10 to the 13 times more, okay, to get the same drop in variance from the law of large numbers, okay? So we can use this as a way to classify distribution, okay, pre-asymptotically. You're saying, okay, this is how long it takes. This is easy. You see how sums work. This is Gaussian, this is Cauchy, and in between them, you know, the sums goes up some speed. This is the sum, not the average, of course. So the behavior is sum before the limit. So we came up with a measure of kappa, which would be 0 for a Gaussian and 1 for a Cauchy. Okay, that's it, the kappa, and basically, as you can figure out, you can start comparing distribution to see what is the higher your kappa, the fatter your tail. Okay, kappa of 1, basically, you can't talk about the law of large numbers, but kappa 0.99 versus kappa of this. So did this, and of course, discovered a bunch of properties. And this is to answer, this also applies not just temporarily law of large numbers, but for stocks, okay? It applies, we're gonna look at your kappa to see how many n you need to do to drop your variance, even under independent stocks, assuming independence, okay? So which of course is not. So we worked on this, and then sure enough, it applies also to dynamic hedging. And this is an email I sent to Peter, okay? I can show my side of the correspondence, or ethically, I can't show his side, I don't know, okay? But here I was showing him a process with finite variance, the one they were talking about, okay, yesterday, that was used, was student TO3 used by Stanley et al. In about 75,000 papers, saying that finance has finite variance, therefore let's treat it like a Gaussian, and it's approximated by T. Look what happens, the gaps you have. You keep having these gaps, you cannot do dynamic hedging, okay? We don't need some, and it's a lot worse than a jump diffusion distribution, you know, the one we picked up early on in finance when we figured out fat tails. So finally, I'm going to present another thing, tail option pricing under power law. This we've been working on, you know, with my friends, you know, because we buy tail options, so people just to try to convince those who visited us that we're not crazy. We didn't want to publish it. So we started this a long time ago. We submitted, Peter put me in contact with the Journal of Derivatives. We submitted it, and then we realized someone beat us to it, called Hamidiyeh, where he figured out how to price options, but not using the same, you know, approach, but that you can, that there is a connection between the volatility surface and the tail index. But let me show you what the quite shocking result. You know, when you have there's something we call the Karamata point. What is the Karamata point? You know, when you specify a power law, I have the survival function that should not be, that should be equal here anyway, but who cares? This is an error here in the paper, okay? Should be equal to L of X is a slow moving function, okay? Times X. Now, Mandelbrot calls the strong Pareto law is when L of X is a constant. So in other words, when you do a log-log plot, you hit the constant, which you hit automatically with a one-sided Pareto distribution, with a one-tailed Pareto distribution. You don't have it easily with you hit it at some point. So it's pretty much the point where this can be approximated by a constant, okay? So beyond the Karamata point, there's something beautiful. You can price options your head. And how do we know it? From old option traders, before Black-Scholes, or even after Black-Scholes. Black-Scholes wasn't used by traders for years, okay, because it was not considered chic to show up in a pit with pricing sheets. And there were no computers, people would price in their head. If you assume that, depends what you assume is a power law. If S is a power law, if S, the underlying security, is a power law, then a call of strike price 2 you can rate is a ratio of options, okay? It's easy to determine. It's K2 over K1 to the 1 minus alpha, the tail exponent. Here it's a little more complicated. if you center it by S0, okay? Depending what you specify. But so in other words, to price an option, K, if I know the price of any other option in the tails, in that Karamata area, guess what? I don't need anything. I don't need to know implied volatility, implied volatility, interest rates, interest rates. I know actually there's some interest rate, but for discounting. But I don't need any information, okay, other than what alpha I'm using. It doesn't, you know, and you can easily find the alpha from option prices. So so this we've been using for years, but we only wrote the paper in like 5 years ago, and we submitted it too late. But you know, we could probably modify it and publish it. But we're not interested in publishing it. We're just interested in showing that we're not crazy buying out of the money option, because under power law, look what you have. This is Black-Scholes. This is how the option price declined in log of K. And this is under different alpha distributions. And if you look at the market, sometimes some options are below our thing, okay? Now they're above a little bit. Sometimes some of them are, but in other words, you can figure out the alpha, the implied alpha from option prices. So this is sort of like what we worked on. So let me conclude, I guess, the last, actually have a bonus of 8 minutes, so we can have a discussion. So let me conclude. When I think of Peter, think of the stairs. The staircase to infinity, the guy keeps going up, kept going up. So this is, to me, and it's very inspiring. There's a fellow at Columbia who was at the funeral of the first, after what do you call it, memorial? It was not. It was like a funeral, but not a funeral. He was there, and he said that he had never seen anyone go from university to practice and be so productive. Okay, he said that, and effectively, to say no, you're underestimating. The point is, it's not that he was very productive. The point is, he was getting better and better, better than all these mathematics. I mean, if there's someone, you know, who knew the math of derivatives and could find the reference and find anything, derivatives of outside derivative things, weird mathematics, that was him. Anyway, so thank you for coming, and also I want to thank Barry, Carmen, David Shimko, and all these people for being so, you know, supportive, and the university and the department, and Zara Patterson, and the students who came and helped, and everybody who helped, because it was very well organized thing. And so thanks. So let's do a Q&A.
So maybe 1 minute for one question.
I have 7 minutes. I cut it short.
Okay. Just 1 minute.
Sorry?
You are -7?
I have -7, and
okay, so no
I had
comment?
45 minutes. I'm going to do like Rosa. I'm going to every minute of it.
Okay, so in the name of the other chairpersons of the day, I would like to thank the beautiful talks we had all the way, including Kelly versus Samuelson, and Umberto, who
also, sorry. Also, I forgot about him. Please.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure that the audience...
also, people who came from Italy, from
all over.
From Iceland, Italy, even Switzerland. Someone here, you know, as far as remote a country as Switzerland. Someone came from Switzerland. Who else came? And then we have 2 came from Amsterdam. We had people who flew in for the event. Someone came from London, and even we have some people came from New Jersey, of all places. Yeah,
Okay, thank you all. See you soon. And obviously, we will keep Peter in our memory.
We have a Q&A.
Oh.
About 5 minutes. Sorry?
Oh, we have Q&A?
Yeah. Okay, this is what I meant about the 8 minutes. I left. Okay.
So So any question? I thought you dismissed.
No, I'm not done. This is why I have the 8 minutes. I'm going to use you owe me 2 minutes.
The PhD student should do what the PhD advisor is saying. So, and any question from the audience here or online? You see now the audience is intimidated.
Yeah, you intimidated them.
Why are you modeling the emission rate? Okay, as mean reverting. That's for Bruno and Lime Sharp.
Yeah, he has a question.
Leon is thinking about, and Anonymous, okay, about the emission rate as mean reverting, macroeconomic factors, what kind of indicators to predict crisis, such as COVID-19. Nassim, the anti-fragile person, how can we predict COVID-19?
Okay, number one, we're not trying to predict
or avoid it.
But two things have happened. When Mandelbrot sat down with the great Mandelbrot years ago and said, okay, what is the fattest tail? And he thought, among other things, he thought finance had fat tails. In fact, operational risk in finance has the fattest tail in finance. Derivatives have a fat tail because, of course, the square of a random variable has half the alpha. But the real fat tails turn out to be wars and pandemics, but there was no research on that. So Professor Cirillo and myself was embarked on working with historical data to try to figure out the distribution of pandemics and wars. And it turned out to be very, very fat-tailed. But there was a problem we had to get there, that we had to, you realize that historians are nice people, nice to have dinner with, but they're blind to numbers. They have no notion. Like they tell you in the Peloponnesian War, there were a million people. You have no idea who counted them. Okay, if they send someone back in time to go count it. So we had no good numbers. So we had to figure out something that would be robust to be asked by historians. So we had to work on estimators for these data. And so we figured out that it's very fat-tailed and robust to these things, where you put noise in it, and then also you put different estimates and different techniques. So in other words, even if a certain war cost half the number of lives or 5 times the number of lives, it wouldn't change the tail exponent. That's the beauty, the robustness of power laws. So we figured out that wars were fat-tailed. But I had come into that, I had written in the Black Swan that connectivity would make pandemics a lot worse. And because in the past, you would travel on horseback at the highest speed of 30 miles per hour, and in some villages in the UK, and what's in the UK today, actually in England, North England, got the pandemic, the Great Plague, 335 years after Constantinople. Okay, so to tell you how it traveled, people really didn't travel, and then today you have something called Las Vegas with conferences, or this memorial conference, where you have people coming from Amsterdam and other places who would pick up COVID and take it with them. So you can distribute COVID from a single conference in Las Vegas to 150 countries in a long weekend, okay? So that was the idea in anti-fragile. Connectivity would make these things fly, and people laughed at me. They said, look, you haven't had anything, you don't know what you're talking about. It's sort of like, and until COVID hit. So we were not forecasting COVID. We knew COVID was fat-tailed, not COVID. Pandemics were fat-tailed. So we looked at the fattest of fat-tail is pandemics. Next, you have wars, and then you have the rest. Okay, it's way down. You have the rest. So So we said, okay, it's very fat-tailed. So now the inter-arrival time for fat-tailed processes can be very, very long. Fat-tailed means small number of observations determine the total properties. So this is what we said. We didn't forecast nor anything. And then COVID started, and then we published a paper in Nature Physics with Professor Cirillo, which was nice because epidemiologists had no idea what fat-tailed means. They didn't understand that something that doesn't have a second moment, okay, not even the first moment. One should not use variance and traditional methods. It's worse in finance, actually. Go ahead.
So do you think there is an actual distribution of these things, or that some, like to quote George Box, that, you know, my view is some models are useful, all models are wrong, some models are useful. So when you say things like, you know, pandemics are fat-tailed, yes, do you mean that fat-tailed distributions are a better model, or do you actually think there's a real distribution there that exists?
What we saw is very, very robust. Okay, and let me tell you, let's take wars. Okay, for which I have better numbers in my head. Take wars, very similar to pandemics. You have memoryless inter-arrival time. Okay, the number one we use extreme value theory to you know, say memoryless inter-arrival time between things, and also the tail exponent doesn't change much. I think it's 0.58. Right. If you throw away half the numbers, you keep throwing half the numbers, the distribution of tail exponent doesn't change much. For pandemics, I think it's pandemics have tail exponent even lower. I don't recall what it was, Pasquale. Sorry? Yeah, so it's about something around half tail exponent. So that gives you something robust. You remove the data, you get the same, you know, log plot. You remove half the data, you get the same. So it appears to be a distribution. Yeah. So Mike Lipkin wants, go ahead, but because I did attack him personally, so he has to respond. No,
that was really nice, and I've actually read in your concerto about this. But a natural question is, it's not clear. I mean, you sort of said that because we could travel by plane, you know, you see this, but then pandemics will die out sooner, whereas it took 350 years to get to the UK from Bulgaria. So my question is, presumably there's a natural time scaling so that if you rescale time, all pandemics look the same.
I would say that what would change in this representation, what would change is not the tail exponent. Sorry, to answer the question, the previous question as well, both questions, it's the scale that changes, not the tail exponent. You see the idea? So the scale will change, not the tail exponent. But there may be something about the current world where the limitation is that, remember that the Great Plague could not reach the Americas. So scale or no scale, you had continents that were completely isolated. And today we don't have that. So conditional on linking continents together, it would be a matter of scale, and we agree. Okay, the great question. I thought you were going to attack me on alpha 3.
I agree. I just wanted.
He was a pit trader. So pit traders, typically, if they agree with you, it's good news.
Nassim, there is a question from Leon who finished his question, but you decide.
He's asking Leon if there's a price at which the seller would be adequately compensated. My answer is no. Okay, unless the option represents a very small portion of your portfolio. Because if you do it for a living, you know, Kelly or no Kelly or something dynamically, you hit the absorbent barrier. Unless it's a put that is way below your thing, your capital. So in other words, you can sell a put as finite loss, but no, because the option, I mean, I have not, let me tell you honestly, I have been in this business for a long time. You don't see dead option sellers. I see dead option sellers. The Symmetry is huge. You don't hear about it because they don't write about their losses. Okay, so you think that you see you see them when they're winning. There's a survivorship bias in that story that is monstrous. So is there a price at which, yeah, I mean, you probably, in theory, there is a price, but I don't know if someone was going to pay you the same thing for a put, for a call as for the stock, right? So or something like that. There is a price, but I'm talking in practice, Leon, okay?
Okay, thank you. Any last comment?
Okay. Okay, so it looks like I have 5 extra minutes. Thank you very much. Very honored, Mary Peter.
I know you're heading for the door, so I'll make this very brief. But just to offer one perspective, thank you, by the way, for this amazing talk. And it seemed very, very personal and very deep in many ways. Thank you so much. I'd like to say that there's a perspective here about community. And although, a lot of people, worked so many hours on this project, and I was really laughing when Nassim and yet we're trying to name the people, because I tried to do that earlier today. The list was over 100 people have been involved directly in this conference. And if you account all the people that are, also online and, in attendance, that number is going to be closer to 1,000 people. So keep that in your mind as we think about, martingales and, equilibria and fat tails and so on. There's something bigger here that Peter, if he didn't start it, he grew it. And we have this community here. And even though all these people put so much time and so much work into this, the one thing that wasn't hard was to get people to do it. They just lined up. The first one in the door, Christos here from the Society of Quantitative Analysts, got a call right away. How can we help? How can we be a part of this conference? Can we co-host with you? Offer their resources, offer their help, do things we couldn't do. The Dean's Office helped quite a bit, providing staff for us. And as I go, I'm afraid I'm going to miss whole categories of people, but just thinking about what's happened over this time period. Right, the first part was trying to get the Journal of Derivatives on board, which hasn't been an active part of this conference, but you'll see them in 6 months when they publish their proceedings issue with papers that were submitted in the last week from this conference. You have the Journal of Derivatives. You have, in addition, we have the Scientific Committee who evaluated many abstracts for presentation here. It was a competitive process. We turned some away, and look what we ended up with. So many papers and so many varieties and so many dimensions of Peter Carr that we saw here. I told someone on the staff was very surprised that I didn't understand all the papers here by a long shot. But what blew me away was that these are all aspects of Peter Carr's work and his mind, and that we can all see this and see how that all fits together. So you have the Scientific Committee, you have all the people who came here to speak. You had the staff who worked long hours, now working, into their summer holiday, working weekends, working evenings to make this happen. Thank you to all of you. I'm not going to try to mention names. That's a fat tail distribution. I don't want to go anywhere near that, So all those people that contribute to this and made it amazing, right? So thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the participants in the conference. We had many people who were here, many were online, many who signed up. A few didn't show up. Okay, fine. Got 1,000 more. But I want you to take away one thing, please, from this conference, which is, how do we sustain this community? What can we do? As we think about the papers we write and the co-authors we have and the ways we get together. And hopefully someday we can have another Peter Carr Memorial Conference. I'm not committing to anything because right now we just need a rest. But maybe we can keep this alive. And I think Bruno left already, I calmed him, but the idea of never having to die a second death is amazing. Thank you to everyone. The papers will be, the ones that we're allowed to distribute will be available in the next few days. We just have to check the permissions for what we can distribute. The recordings will be available eventually on YouTube, subject to the same limitations, but we'll do our best to make this available to everyone in every possible way. Okay, now we do have a few, believe it or not, bottles of wine and snacks left over. You're happy to stay for a very casual, not planned, but very impromptu meeting outside and share a few remarks before leaving if you have a chance. Thank you so much for coming. It was great to see everybody, old friends, and meet some new friends, and be well. Safe travels.